Before we start, I just want to give a shout out to Darth Zombie for letting me use some of his alien isolation footage in this video. This guy is another of YouTube's hidden gems, doing some great content on old, janky, and/or very niche games. He even has his own Prey 2017 review, so why not head over there and check his stuff out, and tell him Arkham sent you. The immersive sim has held a special place in my heart since I played the original Deus Ex. Before then, I'd never encountered a game that allowed for so much personal expression through play. The concept of play your way and your choices matter gets batted around a lot in games, especially bloated open-world monstrosities that really needed greater focus. In most cases, this experience can be boiled down to choosing very limited branching paths in a story that ultimately bring you to the same conclusion with minor differences, and choosing between a silent and stealthy approach, usually with a low body count, or just going in guns blazing like a madman. To encounter a game where the level is a puzzle and there's no actual right way to complete it was mind-blowing to me on my first run, and even more so on my second, when I realized just how much I'd missed the first time, either by not being thorough or because I'd made a completely new character build. I thought this was the future of gaming when I was playing it, that the concept of highly curated linear levels with set lock and key puzzles would be phased out, in favour of larger, more open environments designed as nothing more than functional spaces for you to just figure out for yourself, with maybe only the occasional vent or concession to reality that made gameplay more fun. Oh, how wrong I was. This probably comes down to just how difficult it is to design an immersive sim. Game design is a process with a lot of redundancy at the best of times. It's very trial and error, especially the level design. Large studios can be scared of committing to something because it could get thrown out later and lead to entire worlds needing to be rebuilt from the ground up. For example, imagine you're building a cool skyscraper for a Mission Impossible style infiltration mission. You've got a good mix of access points that maybe the player had to uncover in the previous town section by leveraging contacts and hacking computers. You've got a good variety of options for players to move around unseen, lots of guards to react to their presence, and a security system that ramps up the threat level the more damage you do. Most locks have various ways around them, except maybe that one mission critical one that is tied to an important event. Okay, you're set. And then, one of the guys working on the weapons and gameplay tools comes up with this awesome rappelling tool straight out of the Arkham games, and it's so damn fun that it gets mandated into the game from the first level. Suddenly, all those rooftop and elevator shaft options you built in are incredibly easy to access, and the entire level is a cakewalk from there on out. If you're lucky, a few well-placed guards and barriers might negate the issue, but more likely you're going to be redesigning the entire environment from the ground up to accommodate this new game mechanic. Now multiply that over the entire game, and you can see why not many developers want to dip their toes into the wonderful world of immersive sims. As such, this genre is easily one of the least developed and, according to a recent Steam poll, one of the least played that there is. For immersive sims though, it's a matter of quality over quantity. The Deus Ex series and games like Vampire Bloodlines that straddle the line between RPG and immersive sim are some of the most loved brands out there, with some of the most dedicated fanbases I've ever encountered. The small number of entries in this genre have defined entire gaming generations, and that goes all the way back to the original System Shock. One of the few developers who are really investing in this very difficult to develop genre is Arkane Studios. And if you want to talk about generation-defining games, well, look no further than their Xbox 360 masterpiece, Dishonored. I probably am going to make a complete Legend of Corvo Attano video one day, but suffice to say, there's a good reason why I spent weeks putting together my own custom outfit for my Skyrim character, and always download the Psijic teleport spells mod when I play these days. So in 2014, with a massive success under their belts, Arkane was split into two divisions, each with their own distinct mission. One would take on the near impossible task of following up on Dishonored's massive success with a sequel, and the other would begin to work on a brand new IP. This game would do all the things Dishonored did, but in space. Kinda like the game that started it all. And so, since we're in a horror place, and Signalis really got me in the mood for a little more space horror, let's explore a mystery from beyond the stars, and examine a nearly perfect game that was tarnished by corporate meddling, and leads me to have to add the year of its release after every time I say its name. This is Prey 2017. Generally speaking, an immersive sim protagonist is something of a self-insert. They aren't exactly a silent protagonist, but enough of them is left out for us to fill in with our interpretation. In the case of guys like JC Denton and Adam Jensen, this can affect dialogue choices and alliances, but in all ImSim protagonists, it'll affect your abilities and playstyle. As such, it helps when developers free the protagonist from their past somewhat. In the case of Corvo, for example, turning his life on its head, right down to a creature he no doubt considered to be nothing more than mere superstition up until that point, revealing himself and dumping superpowers on him, created a significant turning point for him to restructure his values and rediscover who he is, so to speak. Prey opts to use something both quite similar and more literal in terms of hitting the reset button, though I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. First, let's wake up, explore our apartment, maybe take a ride in a helicopter, and meet our hero, Morgan Yu. The opening tutorial sets the scene in a well-lit open apartment that's quite the contrast to the cold, empty infinity of space. This whole thing has a very utopian vibe, and it's clear our boy here isn't exactly short on cash. As with any immersive sim, we are at once overwhelmed with things to pick up and move around, buttons to push, and little notes, magazines, and books that are all bursting to tell us all about this amazing new world we found ourselves in. Honestly, all this really puts a smile on my face, and I can only imagine how much trouble it is to optimize all these systems. It's not long before we're on the roof of our apartment building and boarding a helicopter heading for the Transtar Corporation headquarters to get our training so we can be all ready for our big trip into space next month. Okay, cool. I don't mind an integrated tutorial scene providing it's not too long. Otherwise, it'll make replaying the game feel like it's more of a chore and... oh, what a classy way to show people the game's title. Yeah, I think I'm going to enjoy this. From the beginning of this section though, something is clearly wrong. The doctor observing us doesn't seem at all happy with our test results, and right here...
Can someone get me a cup of coffee?
You won't know this on your first playthrough, but this is the moment he seals his fate. I love little moments like this which you can catch on your replay. It's only a matter of minutes after this that everything goes to hell.
Is my coffee? It's empty.
Oh my god! Security! Security!
The opening tutorial sets the scene in a well-lit open apartment that's quite the contrast to the cold, empty infinity of space. This whole thing has a very utopian vibe, and it's clear our boy here isn't exactly short on cash. As with any immersive sim, we are at once overwhelmed with things to pick up and move around, buttons to push, and little notes, magazines, and books that are all bursting to tell us all about this amazing new world we found ourselves in. Honestly, all this really puts a smile on my face. What's wrong with these emails? Opening the door reveals that something has seemingly broken in the very fabric of the world, and it becomes obvious that we need to escape as quickly as possible. Fortunately, the only thing any immersive sim protagonist ever needs is close to hand.
Seal Johnny in before they... Goddamn splicers.
Armed with our new best friend that is going to see a hell of a lot of mileage by the end of this game, we head over to the door to the veranda and... what the hell is going on? While I do consider Bioshock and Prey to be two unique experiences, you can feel how one influenced the other. Here we have a man or woman, you can choose at the start, thrown blindly into a situation while mysterious voices codec call in with information that may or may not be trustworthy. We stumble blindly through this retro sci-fi style office, and before we've even had chance to fully adjust to our surroundings, we're sticking things into parts of our body that have no business being stuck there. We can already immerse ourselves at this point in emails and documents pertaining to the world history, local life in this place, and the sudden transition into a state of emergency. It's a good job we'll be revisiting everywhere more than once because there's more environmental storytelling going on here than you can really take in just a single visit, and you'll probably stumble into even more on a second replay or maybe even a third. But I digress. It's time to enter the Talos 1 lobby and get a first-hand view of what is going on in the universe. Holy fuck. I have a video on my channel about the indie RPG masterpiece Disco Elysium. The game stars a detective who got so blackout drunk one night that he obliterated his entire memory. While on the surface the game is a fun murder mystery with some cool twists and turns, it's on a much deeper level an exploration of the question, who am I? Am I simply a product of my memories and experiences? Or is there something inside that is fundamentally me, that would exist even if those things were taken away from me? Well, both Disco Elysium and Prey 2017 share this theme, and both of them let you explore it through play. Talos 1 is a massive space station orbiting Earth's moon that's owned by the Transstar Corporation and used to research an invasive alien life form called the Typhon. The very specific research that Morgan and his brother Alex were working on was Typhon-based neuromods. Remember this unpleasant thing that we were told to stick into our eye at the start of the game? These things make alterations to a person's brain by mapping another's scanned brain patterns onto them. This effectively allows people to gain access to decades of study and mastery of a skill with nothing but a quick shot to the brain. The Typhon neuromods in particular are much more advanced versions of this that can actually unlock abilities within humans such as shapeshifting and telekinesis. Morgan had volunteered himself to be the test guinea pig for these new modifications. The big catch with installing these things is that, while they can be removed, doing so resets the host's brain back to the state it was in before the neuromods were installed, which in Morgan's case, is here. The simulation was basically a way to help his brain cope with the stress of being constantly altered with neuromods and then reset over and over. Morgan, it seems, was well aware of just how dangerous the Typhon were and had actually set up several contingencies in the event of the Typhon breaching containment and running amok on the station and basically murdering everyone. The first of these that we encounter is a video he recorded to himself as well as this custom operator. That's what these cool retro looking floaty box robots are called, named January, that was programmed to assist Morgan in basically blowing up the entire station in order to prevent the Typhon from ever reaching Earth. Though these things seem quite comfortable in a vacuum, so I'm not entirely sure how they haven't got there already. With all that laid out, it's time to get to work. There's a massive space station to explore, from the very top of the Arboretum to the depths of life support and the primary reactors that keep the lights on around here. We will explore vast open spaces, tight winding corridors, maintenance tunnels bereft of gravity, and even step out into the empty, cold vacuum of space as we try to unlock this place, save anyone we can, and take the fight to the Typhon in a desperate battle to protect the Earth from this parasitic lifeform. Along the way, we will meet a few survivors with their own problems to contend with, overcome numerous challenges, fight a relentless horde of Typhon, and discover most importantly of all, that the Morgan who made January wasn't the only Morgan to set up a contingency plan in the event of a catastrophic failure. It seems with each reset, Morgan came back a little differently each time, and it leaves one wondering, who is the real Morgan knew? Which plan is his truest desire? Or maybe is that even important? Who cares for the wants of a man that maybe doesn't even exist now? What difference does it make that at a time when Morgan had access to different information, and as a result maybe even a different set of moral values, he made certain choices? We don't know those things now, so why should they influence who we are now and what course we should stay to the bitter end? In the end, regardless of who made the plan, the only one who can execute it is us. Let's do a little thought experiment. We'll play some word association and gauge a few answers. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say space horror? Good answer. That's more cosmic horror, but okay. Perfect. We are all a little scared of the dark. That's completely natural. Our primary sensory input comes from our eyes, which receive information from light. So, as the amount of light decreases, so does the ability of our primary sensory input, especially when compared to things that might hunt us at night. So, fear of the dark and avoidance of it is an evolutionary benefit. We crowd together at night and use fire to bring light and warmth and keep whatever may be just beyond the reach of its field at bay. And while we could imagine all manner of shapes hiding just beyond the safety of our light, perhaps the greatest terror the night can offer is the darkness itself. What a truly awful fate it would be to be consumed by it, become lost in it, and ultimately forgotten, vanishing from thought and mind until we may as well have never existed at all. Images of things like Geiger's aliens that come up when I say the words space horror come from the first interpretation. The things lurking just beyond the ring of light cast by our fires, waiting to drag us to some horrific, unknowable fate. Space is infinite darkness, and there are so many things, such as radiation and sub-zero temperatures, that we know about out there that can kill us, to say nothing of the potentially infinite number of possibilities that we don't know about. Monsters and old folk tales are just ways that we gave a name and a shape to things we didn't understand in more primitive times. When you have no knowledge of microbes or understanding of viruses that steal your strength and leave you exhausted and vulnerable to attack, or lead to you choking on your own vomit and mucus, you may conjure up some hidden creatures or boogeyman that brought this woe down upon your tribe, and contrive some bizarre rituals to appease or destroy it. The current scientific model of the universe says the conditions of our planet are the only ones suitable for life, and that every living organism found on any other world would be made of the same fundamental components as us, aka a lot of water. But who knows what adaptations such life would have needed to make to survive. The xenomorph is a terrifying idea of such an alternative evolution, while things like Lovecraft's cosmic horrors remind us that we are insignificant happenings in a vast empty blackness, so finite that we may as well never have existed at all. But let's suppose we are wrong about the conditions for life. Let's suppose there's all kinds of unimaginable life out there in that eternal blackness. Maybe it was born beneath distant stars, or perhaps in the freezing vacuum itself. What would it look like? What would it eat? What would motivate it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at Prey's answer to those questions. I give you the Typhon. The Typhon fill the role of the primary antagonist in the game. There's a few humans who seem to want to make an already terrible situation even worse, but mostly it's these things. In the alternative history laid down in much of the reading material we can find about this place, first contact was made with the Typhon by Russian astronauts back in 1958. And there's actually a really cool video we can find in one of the offices that shows the moment of first contact with these horrors. It does not go well. The Typhon have that amorphous, ever-changing shape thing going on for them. Some have commented that they seem to be composed of matter in solid, liquid, and gaseous states, and they demonstrate the ability to alter their basic shape in a variety of ways. This can be as simple as stretching and extending limbs to more complex things like literally mimicking something that it can sense in its environment as a way of luring prey. Oh man, I'm going to be saying that word a lot, aren't I? Luring prey towards it. We got an eyeful of the process in the game's tutorial. The mimics are easily the most annoying enemies in the game. They're not incredibly dangerous and can be dealt with fairly quickly when found, but the amount of times you'll stumble into these things makes them something of a mild annoyance at the very least. Early on, when these are the only enemy type you'll be dealing with, you'll get into a kind of cat and mouse game with them, firing shots at random pieces of scenery, especially anything that has two of the same item very close to each other. You may even be quick enough to catch one of them as it transforms itself and get a free hit in on it. As your arsenal expands, you gain access to things like null wave grenades that can be used to force them into their natural state, and the scanner that you can find later in the game even has modules for detecting mimics that can be installed into it. This means that later in the game, it is basically your fault if you get caught by any of these, especially the more powerful variants, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating when it happens. The next common enemy types are the larger phantom creatures that we can see stalking around this place. These come in several varieties, rocking different abilities for each, and are much more dangerous to take on. These are the product of a Typhon merging with a deceased human, as made by the Weavers. These annoying things. And some actually have the names of the people they once were and can be found in those characters' offices usually. Given the amount of dead bodies there are on this ship, it's a wonder more haven't been harvested into this shape, but there's still a hell of a lot of these things to make your life very difficult. The Talos 1 space station was built to specifically study the Typhon, and this isn't exactly the first time they've run amok in close orbit to our planet. They are a very aggressive species, almost like a large virus. They enter into an environment, co-opt and consume the native life, and then begin changing said environment to better suit their own needs, so that they can more efficiently consume any other genetic material around them. Morgan's brother Alex comments that after extensive study of these creatures, it's been discovered that the Typhon lack mirror neurons.
You know what we discovered? They lack mirror neurons. For all their wonderful abilities, there's one thing we can do that they can't. Empathize with the suffering of another living creature.
I understand that the word mirror neuron might be quite easy to intuit the meaning of, especially in this context, but just a quick sidebar here. These are very real neurons that exist in human brains. These were discovered in the 1990s and are basically a set of neurons that fire when we observe another person performing an action. More specifically, they fire in exactly the same way as the neurons in the brain of the person performing the action, hence mirror. These are responsible for our ability to learn, but also our ability for empathy. We see someone experience pain, and our mirror neurons fire, causing us to imagine the sensation for ourselves, making us wince and cringe. This tells us A, not to let this happen to us, and B, it engages pack instincts to help and care for someone as we would want to be cared for ourselves. So the Typhon are completely indifferent and possibly even purely instinctual creatures, which reflects some of our greatest fears when it comes to space horror. If we ignore the more primal fear of being lost and alone in an eternal void and simply being forgotten about, we also have no idea of how we would interact with alien microbes or viruses, and what kinds of horrific end might await someone who succumbs to such things. The Alpha Typhon is known only as the Nightmare, and this is the Resident Evil stalker kind of creature in this game. It turns up at inconvenient times to make your life very difficult. Its gut-wrenching wail alerts you to its presence, and then all but the most well-equipped players are going to be running like hell and hiding. This thing, if I'm being honest, is more of a nuisance than anything else. It can be avoided easily by zoning through a load door, or at least I was never followed by one in either of my playthroughs. So then you basically just have to sit in a safe spot and wait for the timer to tick down to 0 before it mysteriously vanishes. This is a nice concept, I guess. I'm a big fan of the stalker system in RE7 especially, but it really needed implementing better here. From the beginning of the game, it's made very clear that Morgan's greatest fear is the destruction even a single Typhon cell could wreak if it were to get to Earth. If that's all it would take, then their biology must be incredibly invasive. It has me wondering about the evolution and life cycle of creatures like this, and what, if anything, could possibly be their natural predator. These questions aren't all that important to the game. In fact, I'd say the less we know about the Typhon, the better. In the end, space horror deals with the horror of the unknown, the big what if, which is exactly why these movies really didn't need to happen. We want to assume that the universe is full of peaceful Vulcans, but what if it's not? What if there's only invasive, aggressive species looking for their next morsel to prey upon? Or, even worse still, what if there's absolutely nothing? What if we are all there is, and even the stars themselves are just snapshots of things long dead and gone, and there is only eternal, black emptiness? For the most part, Prey 2017 is a lonely game. It actually shares a lot of DNA with survival horror in that regard. You begin in a place that isn't even a real place, and emerge into a nightmare with no memory of how you got there, why any of this has happened, or what in the hell you're supposed to do about it. This has led to many comparisons with Bioshock, though that in itself was probably taking something of a cue from System Shock. But there is a certain sense to making characters, especially game protagonists, like this. The hero with amnesia, or the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, is one of the more convenient ways to explore a new world. Since the protagonist, by the virtue of their circumstances, is as clueless as we are, they're likely going to be asking all the same questions as we are. This actually helps with creating the immersive part of the immersive sim. The player loads up the game and says, "Who am I and what am I doing here?" and that sentiment is immediately parroted by the protagonist with amnesia. This method also excuses, somewhat at least, heavy exposition dumps, though in games that's still something of a problem. The rule of show don't tell applies to most media, though any good writer will tell you that if showing is going to damage the pacing of a scene, then just tell people things. In interactive media though, I think it's most important because, number one, it doesn't take control or autonomy away from the player, and number two, it creates incredible moments of exploration and discovery. Think for a minute about the collection of Dark Souls lore YouTube channels that are out there. The entire community has invested so much time into plundering this game that tells you almost nothing about its world for information and compiled it piece by piece into wikis and presented it through various media. All that information was found in the environment and the snippets of lore attached to different items that can be found around the world. Now, true, at the other end of the scale, we have things like the Metal Gear series, which probably spends more time telling you about itself than it does letting you play the damn game, but those are still well loved and very popular for their own reasons. So, Prey takes something of a middle ground between these two extremes. Like with Half-Life, we never, or almost never, lose control of Morgan. So while some characters do pop up later in the game to talk to us, you are absolutely welcome to ignore anything they have to say, or even... I won't say why I did that, but if you know, you know. There are three basic types of narrative in Prey, and most games for that matter. There is of course the plot that drives the experience, then the environmental storytelling hidden in and around the world we explore, and finally, last but not least, the emergent story of the hero and who they are specifically when we are controlling them. Buried within the environment is the big history of the world, the creation of Talos 1, first contact with the Typhon, and indeed, why we have this seemingly utopian society in this retro sci-fi space station that's populated with a massive, multicultural staff, all striving for the betterment of humanity. Much of this is found through newspapers, magazine articles, and other text-based media that highlights the specific forks in history that separate this version of Earth's future from our own. There's also this pretty funny little interactive spot in the lobby, no doubt set up for visitors or new employees who are getting their initial orientation. It has that cheap museum attraction feeling to it, and I can sort of imagine a lot of people either standing there and bearing it while hoping it all ends soon, and other people just breezing through while skimming the plaques on the wall for information. I'm not going to go into the history in any detail because, like with a lot of this game, it's something for you to discover for yourself, or not if you don't care to. As much as I enjoy reading, I find it breaks pacing in a game, and I can't really imagine standing around absorbing a chapter of a novel or pretty interesting news article when the coffee cup next to me could easily transform into a mimic, and try to suck my brains out through my nose like something from a China Mieville book. The real environmental storytelling though is that of the lives of everyone who was living here prior to the proverbial shit hitting the fan. These can be found, among other places, buried in email exchanges on different terminals, and in the various recorded audio messages that can be found, either lying next to the mangled corpses or scattered in a variety of other locations. The great thing about these recordings especially is you can continue to play the game while you're listening to them. This means that we don't have to break up the pacing in any way to get information from them. Talos 1 had a sizable crew, and every single one of them can be accounted for and tracked down via the security stations that are located around the place. The security stations are worked into several missions of the game and help you to locate certain crew members, both living and no longer living. But it's also an incredible attention to detail that every NPC has a name, many have workstations, and they all have a bed or room somewhere in the crew quarters. Checking through terminals will of course unlock useful mission information, but more interestingly, will give you access to slices of personal life of all the people who were working here and help you to get a sense of the community they had formed. One example would be how Franklin Good and a few of the Hardware Labs guys decided to use their sizable intellects and the near infinite power of the fabricator technology to create what is basically a Nerf crossbow, with the sole intention of annoying the hell out of each other and goofing off with it. Evidence of said frolics can be seen all over the station, and the weapon, named the Huntress Boltcaster, a name that really lets us know we're dealing with a bunch of massive nerds with too much free time here, can be found all over the station, as it became an object of some interest for many crew members. I personally found only one use for it in my game, but it's a wonderful piece of world building that actually makes me feel a little disheartened at just how many of these little stories have ended for good. Then there's the RPG game that's going on in the crew quarters. You can find the game set up there, as it was clearly in full swing before the alarm started sounding, and everyone promptly ran to evacuate and get murdered by ravenous aliens. Character sheets with little sketches and flavor text can be found and collected all over the station for this little game, and there's also a small treasure hunt side quest connected to it that I've yet to actually finish. After all, of course there was going to be some Dungeons & Dragons going on. What else did you expect to break out when a group of massive nerds get together in a relatively enclosed space for a long time? Love? Well, actually yes. One quest in particular has us trying to track down audio logs of Danielle's show. Yes, that is exactly the reference you're thinking of. But rest assured, there isn't a single reference to any other game anywhere in this one. Miss Show is the chief archivist in the deep storage section of the station, and she created a password lock keyed to her voice print to keep people out of it during the emergency. As such, we need to either find her and hope she's alive, or track down enough recordings of her voice to create a composite audio and override the lock. Going through her stuff and listening to her interactions, we soon discover that she was romantically involved with Abigail Foy. Giggity. And we stumble onto several recordings of a more intimate nature that detail significant moments in their relationship, including its somewhat abrupt end not long before all this went to hell. It's actually very genuine and touching. After all, love is really a beautiful thing. And this was no doubt just one of many romances that blossomed on this station, to say nothing of all the people with families back on Earth who are never going to come home again. It makes looking around the station, especially when you consider that Morgan is in some part responsible for all this, very depressing, and gives you plenty of incentive to put down the shotgun and reach for the stun gun when the mind control crew members start showing up later in the game. The crew quarters especially are full of interesting rooms and personal spaces that tell you something about the people who live there, even down to how Morgan's room on the station is eerily similar to his room in the simulation. I don't want to get too lost in this world building though, lest this video balloon into some multi-hour monstrosity that I am absolutely not ready to edit. So why don't you go exploring this place for yourself, and then let me know in the comments which area held the most interest for you. So finally, it's time to talk about emergent narrative, and that means talking about Morgan, and maybe getting a little philosophical. Morgan has done some pretty horrific stuff in the name of science. There's an entire section of the station dedicated to volunteers, people who will be test subjects for the new neuromods. But Arkham, wait, I hear you say. Isn't Morgan the guinea pig for the new neuromods? Isn't that why there's a whole simulation set up so his brain doesn't implode from the stress of constantly being reset like this? Yes, you're absolutely right. The, air quotes, volunteers are actually prisoners from various countries of various kinds. They've been shipped up here to get their sentences severely reduced by helping in the name of science and the progress of humanity. And by severely reduced, I mean they are placed in an enclosed space with a Typhon and brutally murdered so that the Typhon can multiply and their genetic material can be harvested for neuromod creation. Maybe not the worst thing in the world when dealing with, say, some remorseless human trafficker, but kind of a shitty thing to do to a political prisoner who maybe thought Russia wasn't as great as it liked to claim it was. Not sure where they'd get that idea. So we actually have the opportunity to witness this process firsthand when we stumble into this room, meet the aforementioned human trafficker, and have the option to either release him and get a code for a nearby armory, or let one of our little amorphous friends do what they do best to him and extract the materials. Just pick the practical option, right? Why let morality play into it? Morgan's done this many times before, right? Well, no. At least not that he's aware of, and certainly not that we're aware of at this point either. Morgan can't make this decision based on any morality that he held before, because the events of his past have absolutely no power to control him. This is philosophically true for all of us, but it's especially true for him because he doesn't remember anything that came before waking up in the middle of this nightmare. So maybe this guy is a really horrible person, and maybe some kind of retribution is forthcoming, but is this it? Now, I took the code because at the time, that was the most practical option, but I honestly don't pass any judgment on you for whatever you choose. This is only a game. But isn't it great how in these virtual worlds we can explore morality and consequences in a relatively safe space? We see video recordings and hear audio of conversations from Morgan at various stages of the operation, and he set up several options for dealing with this very specific situation. Of course, each time he did it, he completely forgot that he'd done so, and each option implies that he was something of a different person when he made these choices. While he does lose his memories, there is some kind of implied deeper transformation going on, and Alex is convinced that Morgan in the game isn't the Morgan he started the project with. So, which ending do we choose? Which version of Morgan do we listen to? Which past incarnation most reflects his true intent? Well, honestly, none of that matters. Like the Buddhists and the Stoics agree upon, only now matters, because now is the only time that you can do anything. Whatever Morgan did before, whoever he was when he murdered humans in the name of science, or set up an escape pod for himself versus figuring out a way to save the entire station, isn't important. It could be argued that those people may as well never have existed. We are rational beings after all. We are not mindless instinctual creatures or slaves to some perceived nature that was predetermined to us at birth. On the wheel of samsara, gods and angels can only be gods and angels, and demons can only be demons, but we, the rational beings, we have a choice, and regardless of whatever came before, or whoever you were at one time in the past, none of that stops you being a good person, or at least being a better person, now. So, we are Morgan. We choose what happens next, not the echoes of a forgotten past. In the end, it's up to us to decide who he really is now, and even who he will be beyond that. I've been on something of a genre crusade in the last couple of videos. That probably stems from the fact that survival horror is something of an abused term. This is largely because Capcom, the people who coined the term, also went ahead and slapped it on Resident Evil 4, a game that offers a completely different player experience to those that came previously, and the whole thing kind of snowballed out of control from there. There's been something of a backlash to this, with people trying to truly codify and even police certain genres, which I think is very well meaning, but because of the muddy nature of game genres, they are maybe a little misguided. For example, if you think Borderlands is an RPG and not a looter shooter with RPG elements, that's fine, because for you as a consumer, a genre just needs to tell you that X is kinda like Y, and that should help you with purchasing decisions. It's only really important for creators, as it can help them to focus in on a player experience and make quick decisions about what will add to that and what will subtract from it. This will in turn reduce redundancy, which is a huge part and problem of game design. So, immersive sim is another of those very muddy genre terms. The words themselves don't tell you anything about the game. After all, isn't every game a kind of simulation? Don't they all want some degree of immersion? So then we have to look at the common elements that make up these games and try to patch them together into something coherent. System Shock, and much more so System Shock 2, was very much the original blueprint for this genre of first-person action with RPG elements and a focus on player agency and choice. It is very hard to really categorize this one. Still, Prey definitely ticks all those boxes, even down to UI elements that have been around since System Shock and Deus Ex, as well as Arkane's staple hypermobility that has got to make level design for these games a logistical nightmare. Immersive sims are easily one of the most challenging genres to develop for, as balancing all the different systems so that one approach to an objective is just as viable as another is incredibly difficult to do. You don't, for example, want to give people the option to be a full stealth build that never needs to fight anyone, then force them into a boss battle shootout. Now I want to say here that I'm really glad that I recorded this footage and also based this review off my second playthrough rather than my first, as I had a lot more complaints the first time around. I'll bring a few of those up later, as I think first time player experience is important, but a large part of the problem boils down to not having enough information at the start, which again is just a very hard thing to balance. Tell your player everything and get accused of handholding. Tell them nothing and you're catering to a much more limited audience. Early on in the game, you'll gain access to your first neuromod. These are the game's character upgrade currency. They can be found all over the ship and can eventually be crafted at the fabricator. The strength of upgrade systems like this is they eliminate any obligation for the player to kill enemies or complete quests to grind XP. Now, of course, you want your players to engage with your side content for many reasons, but because immersive sims prioritize player agency, giving them the option to skip almost anything completely or just straight up murder anyone who comes to you for help is something that needs to be considered. Anyway, getting back to this first neuromod, you open up the menu and you are met with 3 basic skill trees, and at that stage, you have absolutely no idea what any of these upgrades really translate to in game, if they'll be useful all the way through, or even if you'll get bored with a particular playstyle later and want to change things up. In a fantasy RPG, for example, you may have the same issues, but it's not too hard to intuit where the skills that fit the stealthy archer or the thuggish tank can be found. This setting and these skills are pretty new though, so you may find yourself feeling shortchanged on an ability you buy early game, at least not without a guide. This problem only gets more complex later when Typhon-based neuromods show up. I'm looking at these and thinking, of course I want to be able to transform into a coffee mug, but how often is this going to be useful in the game? This isn't exactly unfair. You can, after all, make as many neuromods as you want later in the game, and it's good that you can learn and have a different experience on your replay. So I'm not altogether sure what the compromise is here, but this was definitely the source of most of my late game issues on my first time through. For this playthrough, I personally maxed out Engineer and made sure that I got these mods in particular as early as possible. I invested almost nothing in Typhon neuromod powers, though I did take the big kinetic blast, which can be useful for locating and clearing out mimics, or just hacking chunks out of larger enemies' health bars later in the game. The advantage of Engineer is that while there are plenty of weapons and ammunitions to find all over the station, you're going to need to craft a lot of it yourself in order to be well equipped all the way through this fight. As such, it is your job. No, it is your duty. Nay, your sworn oath unto whatever god or deity you worship to hoover up every single piece of junk you find and throw it in the recycler. Trust me, you are going to need everything you can get, so get those inventory upgrades as quickly as possible. From there, it's crafting time. Crafting is done at these fabricators that are scattered all around Talos 1. You need to find various recipes and permissions in order to make specific items, and you'll need to repair some of the machines as well in order to have convenient access to them all over the station. so that's another bunch of neuromods to spend there. But from there you can craft basically anything with the push of a couple of buttons and put it to good use in your mission. There's an odd survival horror quality to this. You move between safer locations, burning through resources before slipping back to a quiet spot to organize your inventory and resupply for the next run out into the unknown. And the similarities don't end there. Unlike Dishonored, which has a variety of different mission locations, Talos 1 is a single, colossal mega dungeon that you unlock slowly, basically taking the long way around to the new area and then unlocking the shortcut back to your safe room or bonfire if you prefer. Arkane are no stranger to this concept either, as it was something they implemented in their very first game, Arx Fatalis. I've never actually played this game, but GigaChad the Summer of Mark has once again got us all covered with this video here. So go take a look if you're interested. In Arx Fatalis, the dungeon was a series of interconnected tunnels and caverns, while here in Prey, we have this massive space station to explore, from the Arboretum at the top, all the way to the life support system and power reactor at the bottom. And we even venture out into space to jetpack around the outside and access areas via different airlocks. But exploration doesn't end there. There's a variety of systems in the game that can help us overcome various barriers, such as repairing damaged machinery and hacking. Just like with Deus Ex, hacking is handled through a minigame, but unlike Deus Ex, this one is absolutely fucking awful, and I fully encourage you to just save scum your way through it as much as possible. I never really bothered with anything higher than hacking level 2, and I wouldn't say I missed anything particularly important. Remember, this is an immersive sim, so there may be keys or codes just waiting for you in the next room. There's even this one safe in the opening section right next to this whiteboard. How convenient is that? Later though, when we are watching a video call from our past self, we can actually see the whiteboard as it was in the past and get the code for the safe. But you don't just need to crack locked doors the regular way. Verticality plays a huge part in all Arkane Studios games, and Prey is no exception there. If you can't go through something, you may just as likely be able to find a way under or over it. Early on in the game, we get access to the glue gun. This is your Half-Life 2 gravity gun of sorts. Seriously, this thing is unbelievably broken, and I only hope it was conceived at the earliest stages of development, because I can only imagine how much they'd have to redesign the levels based around the player having access to not only this, but a jet propulsion system that could make falls from any height possible. The gun is useful for slowing down and binding enemies in combat, leaving them open for wrench hits and automatic critical hits from other weapons. Its most useful feature, however, is basically letting you create stairs and bridges to move, more or less, anywhere you want. The devs really went out of their way to stress just how important and useful this tool is, as they are often found near corpses, surrounded by a lot of evidence of their being creatively employed to evade or overpower enemies. The QA team must have had so much fun trying to break the game with this thing. So this is an awesome tool, and is a big part of what makes playing Prey something of a unique experience, as well as immensely fun just to goof off with. Since we've already brought up shooting things, I think now is a good time to slide into talking about combat overall, because this is another area where Prey 2017 really shines. For my first playthrough, I opted for a pure run and gun approach. This is quite the opposite of how I approach games like Dishonored. In Dishonored, there are humans who can get caught in the crossfire, people to whom I'm sympathetic. Also, the first Dishonored especially has a high and low chaos system that places judgments on your actions and even implies an overall better or worse ending based on them. As such, I tend to play as stealthily as possible and really creep through areas, often save scumming when I get seen. But since there's nothing sympathetic about the Typhon, I was free to cut loose with everything at my disposal. Run and gun is a perfectly viable play system, but it does mean you'll spend a lot of your resources crafting ammunition, which means less to spend on upgrades and other fun things. So this time around, I got very into Prey's version of the 1-2 punch.
1-2 punch! Remember, the 1-2 punch!
I really didn't appreciate the stun gun that you find very early on in the game on my first playthrough until I got to the crew quarters and needed to incapacitate a lot of the surviving crew who were under the control of some of the more powerful Typhon. This is because the range on this thing is absolutely abysmal, so you're going to want to upgrade that as fast as possible. Enemies stunned with this or incapacitated with the glue gun suffer massive damage when attacked, and can be reliably put down with your trusty wrench too, sparing you a lot of ammunition in the process. This thing is going to save your life a lot when up against any of these larger floating enemies. With a fully upgraded shotgun, you can kill these things before they've even had a chance to recover from the first stun shot. Combine this with some physical upgrades to boost your speed and jump height, the jet booster and cycling quickly between your available weapons, and you're going to feel like the Doomslayer, absolutely decimating your enemies by the end of the game. It's an odd choice to underpower your player at the start so that just getting to base level feels like progress, but it's something of an immersive sim staple. Look at Deus Ex and its shrinking targeting reticle, or Human Revolution assigning energy cost to just punching someone out, as if that's not something Jensen does just by accidentally brushing up against someone.
See you around, asshole.
Weapons are responsive with great feedback and sound effects, so they feel powerful. As with everything, they can be upgraded in various ways to increase their range, power and reload speed. There's a pistol, a shotgun, a ray gun, may as well call it what it is, and various grenades. My only wish was that there was a faster way to switch out weapons. Switching between weapons and plasmids in Bioshock is pretty seamless, all things considered, but I could only really use the weapon wheel for fast switching in Prey. Maybe it's because I'm left-handed, but I couldn't find a convenient quick weapon swap option. It's not deal-breaking though, just a minor gripe. So hopefully you can see just how many systems there are and how many choices you have to make. Are you a sneaky hacker? Are you a Mr. Fix-It that uses turrets to do his dirty work? Do you stun and smash your enemies, or are you all about going in guns blazing? Then there's the crew. Are you going to save them, or is it every man for himself? What about those Typhon neuromods? They're clearly very powerful, but take too many and the station security will identify you as a hostile target and turn on you. It can seem a little overwhelming at first, which is why I think I had a much better time on my second playthrough, which leaves me wondering what I'll uncover in my third. All of these choices though come down to, who is Morgan Yu? What kind of man has all this work and this terrible situation made him into? And while some characters will have opinions on who they think he should be, as I've said before, the answer is really up to you. Okay, so this is the spoiler section. If you haven't played Prey and don't want all the good stuff ruined, then skip on over to the conclusion, and I'll bid you a thank you and good day for stopping by. For the rest of us though, let's talk about the endgame. So my first grievance with Prey came just as the endgame started. It's at this point that the powers that be, aka Mom and Dad, decide it's time to intervene and send in a cleaner to eradicate everyone on the station, retrieve all the research, and nuke the station from orbit.
Say we take off, nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
We don't hear too much about the Yu brothers' relationship with their parents prior to this, only that they are working on the new neuromods somewhat under the radar. There's implied tension there, but holy hell, to just order your own kids to be murdered in the name of your next big payday, that's incredibly cold. That isn't the issue though. The issue is this.
Morgan, Dr. Yu? Morgan?
Morgan!
Oh my god, shut the hell up. I get what they were going for here. We're almost at the end, so it's time to up the stakes. The station's been coming apart at the seams, and Morgan has just managed to patch up each hole as it happens up to this point. But now we've added an extra agitator into the mix, and the place has sprung 5 different leaks all at once. The idea being to induce a kind of panic state in the player and have them quickly prioritize the problems and act on them accordingly. Unfortunately, you now not only have to worry about the Typhon, but also Walter Dahl and his infinitely respawning military operators. Yes, you heard me right. The 2 words that scream, we couldn't think of a good way to up the challenge, so as soon as you kill one, another appears. God, I hate when games do this. I guess if you're a stealth build, this might not be so frustrating, but as a more combat focused character, All I could really do was just full sprint past enemies and pop off shots at any that got directly in my path. Getting into any kind of drawn out fight was pointless because it was impossible for me to make any ground, so why bother? And when you consider this game has been telling me I can overcome challenges any way I want up to this point, I am suddenly being robbed of a lot of agency. To stop this particular gripe, you have to find Dahl's personal operator located somewhere on or outside the station. The thing is hacking the computers and causing them to spawn in all these new enemies. Taking it out immediately destroys all the military operators on the station, so at least you don't have to go clean up after. One thing I noticed by playing this a second time is that this operator does seem to spawn at a random location, which adds a bit of interest to this part of the game. And then there's the showdown with our big boss man here, Dahl, which is really good if I'm being honest. Why? Well, he's just a regular dude. Wait, how does that work, I hear you ask? Because immersive sims are all about choices and emergent gameplay. You can't really let people play their way, and then force them into an enclosed arena for a gun battle finale, like a certain Deus Ex game that got dragged over hot coals for doing just that. So with Dahl, it's a matter of how you approach him versus how you fight him. And remember, these are the guys who made Dishonored, so you don't exactly have to kill him to win either. In fact, the non-violent route opens up an opportunity to actually get everyone off the station to safety. Still, there are plenty of other options to get Dahl, one of which involves just sucking all the air out of the chamber he's in and watching him suffocate. Violent lives end violently, it seems. With Dahl out of the equation, it's finally time to meet Alex and for the real endgame to begin.
Morgan!
The arrival of the Apex was something I was honestly not prepared for at all. It was one of those, is this really happening moments, and quite a breathtaking way to wrap up the entire proceedings. I've actually used the null wave and the self-destruct in my 2 playthroughs, and while I've heard it said that the null wave is the good ending, I don't see any judgments being passed by the game in either case. This isn't a Dishonored high or low chaos outcome. It's more like Signalis or Silent Hill 2, where the story is yours to decide for yourself, and really, any of the endings is okay. This particular point is really hammered home when... Okay, yes, this is the spoiler section, so it's a little redundant going over this again, but seriously now, don't ruin this last part for yourself if you haven't finished this game yet. Spoilers within spoilers. What kind of meta-narrative is this? So, after the credits we get the real twist of the knife, something that the game was subtly and not so subtly in places hinting at all the way through. The final revelation is that you're not actually Morgan Yu. You were never aboard the Talos 1 space station, and literally nothing you did there mattered. At least not in the way you think it did. You've been playing a video game. This was never about saving humanity, or preventing the Typhon from reaching Earth because, as we can see...
This is the world today.
The operators surrounding Alex possess the personalities of several NPCs that we encounter in the game. And now the judgments come down. These operators have a lot to say about your merry adventure across Talos 1 and consistently refer to you as it. So, not he, not she or any other pronoun. Then, what? Well, remember this line?
They lack mirror neurons.
Well, now listen to this.
We spent years trying to put what you can do into us. We never tried putting what we can do into you.
So, you're a Typhon, and they've been trying to inject you with empathy. That's a hell of a twist, and I wasn't really sure if I liked it the first time around. Again, it took a replay for me to come around. It's a huge strength to this game that the second run can actually be better than the first. What I like though is that we're still given a final choice. We get to say if this worked, if all that struggle was actually worth something after all. We can be the final hope of humanity, or we can see this as what it is, a violation of our natural order, and act accordingly. So what did I choose? What can I say? I believe that the important part of any journey is who we become in the process, and I'd rather become hope than despair. So everyone, that's Prey. Pure, immersive sim gold. I still prefer Deus Ex for its worlds full of interesting characters and hubs full of secrets to uncover, but there's no doubt that this is something special. The ending does hint at some supposed sequel, but nothing has ever been confirmed, and Arkane has been looking at changing up their experiences for better or worse. Deathloop isn't something I'm super excited to try. I like the concept, and the mystery is intriguing, but I'm happy to wait for a heavy discount on that one. Redfall, on the other hand, now that has my attention. This looks like it could be a lot of fun, and I think I could really enjoy having a few late night sessions with some friends going through this. I'm kinda happy about this though. As much as I'd love another Prey, does the world need another long-running franchise that becomes less innovative and fun over successive entries? Maybe it's better to let this one be one really exciting ride, and then let the developers run off and try to make completely different one-shot exciting rides to keep that innovation flowing and to keep pushing the boundaries of the experiences that we can get with games. If Dark Souls has taught us anything, it's that holding on to things for too long will turn them stale and hollow. Move on, find something new, and always keep moving forward. So, speaking of moving forward, former head of Arkane Studios Rafael Colantonio left Arkane in 2017, citing creative anxiety as the cause. There's a lot of ways to interpret that, but it really just boils down to, it was time to move on. Things change. Arkane wasn't the little studio that made Arx Fatalis back in 2002, and the world of gaming had changed a lot. Change is the natural state of the universe, and you may not always like what something changes into, or you may just be ready for something new and fresh yourself. Rafael departed for his own new horizon, and in 2019 announced the formation of a small indie dev company called Wolf-Eye Studios. Maybe you can see where this is going. I love strange stories, fairy tales, ghost stories, and weird fiction. And while we've tackled a variety of game genres on this channel, we've yet to visit the American frontier, a time and place that has been romanticized in a wide collection of media. A new world, a fresh start, and all kinds of unknown dangers that may lead one to stumble into a little magic in a place like this. So saddle up everyone, because next time, we are riding on out to the Weird West. Well, hello you. Thanks for taking this little trip into orbit with me, and sticking around all the way to the very end. Hopefully it was as fun a time for you as it was for me. I honestly can't believe we're already into April. Time just moves so fast these days. I got a pretty nice collection of indie games in the recent Steam Spring sale, and I suspect at least one of them is going to be content on here sometime very soon. Anyway, I hope you're all keeping well, and that spring brings new and exciting things for you. If you're here, then maybe take a minute to leave me a comment or check out my Twitter. Thanks again anyway. Until next time, friends. Peace out.